the fact that US broke the deal, it was a law that had been worked on for like 10 years. And after 10 years, there were 6 countries that came to a conclusion with Iran, and they all made a deal. And Iran just did literally everything that was in the deal, and US just backed out.
Americans are often accused of not being the most attentive to the ongoings in the foreign policy realm. But you would be hard-pressed to find a single person who didn't realize that Iran was a major player in our foreign policy for the first half of the summer. While it may have been pushed off the headlines for now, the tension between the US and Iran is steadily escalating, and this rise may not be over yet. This week's guest is Shiva Farooqi. Born and raised in Iran and having attended the University of Tehran, where she received a bachelor's degree in industrial design. Shiva is an entrepreneur. She later moved to the US, where she received her master's in industrial design at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. Shiva currently lives in Portland, Oregon, where she is working on a host of projects, including Init, a video based social media campaign that's intended to help individuals spread awareness about issues they are passionate about. I'm excited to have Shiva on the show today to discuss her work as well as the continuing development of Iran US relations. Welcome, Shiva. So good to have you here.
Thank you, Sadia. I'm really happy to be here.
And you're in New York with us, so you're
Yes.
visiting. How are you liking New York?
Actually, I've been here before. This is my second time. And this time I feel like it kind of feels like Tehran to me, like how busy it is and how much like people are just going everywhere. The cars, nobody like, I don't know, care about the street lights.
Yeah. So let's talk about Tehran.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Tehran.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up in Tehran post 1979 revolution and post Iran-Iraq war? What was it like growing up as a child? Can you draw us a picture of Tehran?
Well, I think the Tehran that when I was child, I experienced it is pretty different with what it is right now. First of all, like after the revolution, because like most of the like religious leaders took over, the schools were a lot more strict than what they are now. But right now, there is like a lot more connection to the world outside through internet and social media and satellites that people have. So they're a lot more connected to the outside world. But I think the whole time, like in Iran, there was a lot of duality. Like the life that you would have in the streets or in the school and the things that you would learn from the national TV was very different with what people would experience in their private life and with their families. Like everything almost, especially for the families that were more progressive and less religious. For instance, you would have to wear a headscarf in the streets and in the schools from when girls are 7 years old, they have to start wearing something that is like a scarf that is like closed from. I mean, it's hard to like explain it,
Yeah.
but you would have to like start wearing that from when you were 7 years old, but you wouldn't wear it in front of like men when it was like in a party or people you know in your like house and stuff like that, but you had to do it in the street. Again, there is another like contrast. Like in the schools, you had to wear it from when you were 7, but in the streets, there was no pressure. You could like start wearing a scarf from when you were like 11 or 12. Or a lot of times, whatever like the TV would show you would be different from what the satellite or the Iranian channels that were being broadcasted from outside of the country would tell you.
And how does that duality impact people? Like, how did it impact you growing up, having to live that dual identity in Iran, where you follow certain rules outside your house and then rules inside your house are different?
I feel like your trust and belief to the government or to the system becomes a lot lower. And I feel like doing things that are illegal becomes more normal because when the needs and values of the people are not aligned with what the rules of the country are, then people live this like double life in one, they can do whatever they want and it's illegal, but in their brain, they have a reason for doing that and they seem to think that this is completely accepted. So I think it's not a good idea to have a country like that, because if people get used to doing things like that and becoming a hypocrite or lie, then they can apply that to other things. I'm not going to say like our people are all liars or stuff like that, but definitely they're more flexible to making decisions based on what they think is right or wrong rather than based on the rules.
So, Shiva, you talk about how government has these policies and people don't agree with that. Is that majority of people in Iran? Is it specifically the youth that has different vision of what Iran should be? We see that there is this skewed understanding of the Middle East, especially Iran. And there are times when people conflate government with people of Iran. Can you talk a little bit about that and how people are different or similar?
I don't think I have an exact number, but what my best guess would
Mm,
be is like 40% accept the rules and
mm,
60% not.
mm.
Like, something like that. I think the bigger cities like Tehran, Esfahan, Shiraz, or Rash, there are some like bigger cities. And definitely the youth are just more progressive. I mean, Tehran, I think it's way more than 40%.
Yeah.
Like, no, I mean, way less than 40%.
So let me ask you this question. A white person going to Tehran, how scared should he or she be?
Actually, not at all.
So let's talk about that then.
Yes. So I think one of the biggest assumptions that people have about Iran is that it's not safe,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it's very, 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 very safe. And any tourists that go to Iran have said that, and everyone is like, "Oh my God, that is so different with what we expected." Especially like white people, because people see them less. They are much more welcoming to them, and they like to talk with them, or even sometimes they invite them to their houses. That's how they're like nice and hospitable. And sometimes like I've been asked, "Oh, are you happy that you're here and you're out of like the war?" And I'm like, "What war?" They're
Is the
like
war.
there is no war. And they're like, "Oh, but it's like, is it safe?" I'm like, "Yes, like we have a very, very, very safe country, because there are like three levels of things like police, and we have like three levels. Like it's like the National Guard and it's the police, and there is another voluntary thing called Basij. So they are like they keep the country very safe, and definitely reinforce their rules on people.
And also, let's talk about another myth, women's rights, and how women are treated, and in terms of acquiring education and liberty. What are your thoughts on that as an Iranian woman who's lived most of her life in Iran?
I mean, I don't think they respect women's rights the way they should, but I think it's better than what people think. So, majority of the educated people in Iran are women.
Okay.
So, like the attendance in university is majority women. Women can drive. Women can literally take most jobs that men can, except they can be president or judge or a few other jobs they can't have, but other jobs they can actually have any of them. But there are certain rules that are, I think, really bad. And
And what's the justification for woman should not be the president or judge? Is there any justification by the government
yeah, I
to
can tell
enact
you.
those? Yeah, yeah, I want to know.
So for the judge one, I know they say it should be a man because women can make decisions based on their emotions rather than like logic.
Oh,
So they said we can't trust a woman's decision if she becomes a judge. It should be purely based on logic. I
oh.
mean, I don't agree with that, but that's the mentality.
That's the mentality.
Yes.
That's sad mentality, but
Yes.
okay.
Also, like laws that I do not accept is that if you want to travel outside of the country, you need your husband's permission.
Oh,
Yeah. Or like there are certain rights that you can get when you get married, but you should like write it as like extra things. and go to a person, like to a lawyer, to like sign it off, and both parties, like both husband and wife, accept it and sign it. And because, like, for instance, women can't travel, or the husband can tell you like you shouldn't like study, and you should accept unless you have written in that paper that as a woman I have the right to get a divorce, I have the right to choose where we live, I have the right to travel outside of the country whenever I want, and I have the right to choose any job that I want. Otherwise, your husband can limit your rights to those things.
Is there a restriction on what kind of rights you can ask for? For instance, the rights that you have just outlined. If you wanted all those rights, is there a restriction on what, like, how many rights you can have? So there's no restriction. So anybody, any woman can just make a long list of rights, and then she will be entitled to all those rights. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
But a lot of like families think that this is kind of a taboo. And if you discuss these, it means that you do not want to respect your husband, or you're actually planning to get a divorce. That's why you want to write it, and you don't believe in like a long-term life together. I think a lot of youngsters are right now very much aware and add that to their, like I myself did that. I have a marriage license in US, but when I went back to visit my family, we did another one there. So that was like,
And your husband is fine with that.
yeah, of
Right,
course.
exactly. So let's talk about sanctions. Iran has basically been under sanctions since the 1979 revolution. How do sanctions affect lives of ordinary Iranians?
Um, I mean, the first most important thing was the fact that our currency's value dropped so much. So, for instance, $1 was 3,000 tomans, and right now $1 is 12,500 tomans.
And what does that mean?
So what it means is that when a lot of like goods are imported to the country, right? So if something used to be like $3 and you could afford it simply by paying 9,000 tomans, now you have to pay a lot more for the same thing while your salary has not increased much. So which means a lot of inflation. So people have to take so many jobs, or it's just really hard, especially for younger generation, to find a job and like get married and like rent a house or buy a house and become independent, because all these costs like add up. I mean, you can't really plan for your life, you choose a job and a salary and like plan, and all of a sudden you realize you can't afford anything that you could afford like 1 month from that time. And also, it means that all the medicine is becoming really expensive, and a lot of things are not even available, because people think like sanctions just pressure the government, but actually, it pressures the people, like especially the lower class and middle class of the country. It really destroys them. Imagine you have cancer, and then you have to make a decision of not getting treated because you can't afford it. That's like, I mean, I feel like it's a slow death.
So, what you're saying is that sanctions, like, although they are presented as helping people of Iran, that is not true. They run counter to that. In fact, they harm people of Iran more than they harm the government.
Yes, of course. It does, however, hurt the government as well, but not as much as the people. People are the first victims, and they're suffering so much that honestly, I went there last summer and I felt like the whole city was depressed. Like you felt it. There is a lack of hope in the younger generation. But I mean, I feel like this year it's a little bit better, but last year was all of a sudden all of those sanctions got added and everything. It was just a feeling of hopelessness. I mean, it's still bad, but people are trying to find ways to make it work, and they're trying to fight back. And also, like when your currency's value becomes lower, then exports become better. But we are limited because we can't do banking with most countries around the world. We are sanctioned. Our banking system is sanctioned. But I mean, I think there are some countries they can do some trades with, and they're focusing on that. And then also, what my father was telling me a few days ago was saying that actually like a lot of Iranian goods are becoming available because they can't import them. The cost would be really high. So they're actually making everything in the country. So the industry is like
Growing.
growing, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, Shiva, you are a green card holder. You live in the US now. How did you try, like, why did you decide to come to the US? What was the journey like? And what are some of the challenges that you faced when you initially came here?
I came because I knew that Art Center College of Design that I went is like one of the best design schools in the world. And when I got my admission and I could attend it, I was like super happy because they only accept 12 people per year. And I was one of the ones that got accepted. So it was amazing. It was really hard. I mean, it's a really challenging school, but that was the main reason I came. Then afterward, I decided to gain experience in the field. And then I was like 50-50 between going back or staying. But then I got married with my current husband. Like, I mean, I just had one husband. I said current husband. Yeah. So I got married and he preferred to stay, especially because it seemed like our economy was becoming bad at the time. And we got accepted for the green card through the, what is it called? This EB1, which is like for special talents and stuff like that. So that's when we get that. And so we were like, okay, now we have green card. So it's better to stay for a while and gain more experience.
And I was doing research for this interview, and you mentioned somewhere that there are two events that have really impacted you and have shaped your outlook on life and your work that you're doing with your organization in it. One is the green movement, and other is the travel ban. Can you talk a little bit about how those two events have impacted you?
Okay, so the green movement was when I was actually attending the University of Tehran in Iran, and it was the hub for all the protests and everything that happened.
Can you talk a little bit about the green movement?
Yeah, so there were a few candidates for presidency. Most of the younger generations and progressive people believed in one, which was Musavi, and the other candidate was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and it would have become like his second term.
Yeah.
So we already had him for 4 years, and we were like, okay, no, we don't like him. We want someone else. And it was I think there were a lot of like debates going on, and they were trying to ask people like who they gonna vote, and we would see the numbers were all showing that Musavi is gonna be like chosen, and like whoever you would talk to, they would say Musavi. And people voted, and it seemed like whenever like even they would go to a stadium to like have these gatherings, Musavi's like a stadium was packed, and it would just show that like people love him. And then when the election happened, the results were they were like live. They were showing the results, and Musavi was like had a lot higher numbers than Ahmadinejad. And all of a sudden, it just switched. And then they said, "Oh, Ahmadinejad is the winner." I'm like, "Are you kidding?" So that's why everyone believed that it was they were cheated on, and the results were changed. I mean, we can't really prove it, but we had a lot of like evidence, and we saw a lot of people that all like literally, no matter who you would talk to, they had voted for Mustafa. I don't know how that happened. That's why afterward there were a lot of like protests in the street, and people were like the main thing they would say is like, "Where is my vote?" That was what it was going on, and it was pretty chaotic. And they had to shut down our school, like our university. Like we had our final exams. They said like, come back 2 or 3 months from that time to do your exams because they didn't want anyone like to gather, and because the students were in the university, and like as I'm saying, like University of Tehran is massive and have a lot of students in them. Like every day, people were like, "Where's my vote?" Like gathering. So, and afterward, that all that happened. I mean, many protests, and then nothing. Ahmadinejad was still president.
So, were you disappointed?
Yeah. So there was a lot of disappointment that you couldn't like change the result of something, or maybe all the smaller cities and all the religious people voted for Ahmadinejad. I don't know. that was what they told us. They were like, yeah, maybe the bigger cities voted for Musavi, but you can't prove it. Like all the other cities voted for him.
And the Green Movement was one of the first, at least Middle Eastern uprisings
It was
ever.
the first
Yeah,
before Arab
yeah,
Spring. Yeah.
where in fact social media was present,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, I think like when they talk about Arab Spring, but actually it was the first Middle Eastern country that showed you can protest and you like with like the power of social media and how much attention you can get to what you're saying. Because if there is no freedom of speech, how else you would get your voice heard? And now for the first time, people were able to do that, and then everything followed. Yeah.
And had in it been around at that time, what role do you think it would have played?
I think people would have all taken a video from themselves and saying like who they voted, and like we could count that maybe.
So, would you count a Green Movement as a successful insurgency?
Successful in a sense that people realized that their civic activities has some kind of impact, maybe not in the results of the vote or the system, like, but in the way people around the world perceive you. I think really everyone around the world realized Iran is like much more progressive and young, and they do think and want more freedom. So I think that was impactful, but at the same time, it brought a lot of disappointment. So a lot of people afterward completely disengaged with politics, you
Because they
know.
were
Yeah,
disappointed. And,
because it brings a sense of hopelessness.
So then the travel ban happened, right? Now, again, you mentioned in your bio that you lived through the travel ban. When you say you lived through it, what do you mean by that? And how did the travel ban personally impact you?
So travel ban happened a lot after that, right? It's been like 10 years after that travel ban happened. So at that time I was in Iran. He came here with the belief that like I can have better life here and more freedom, and whenever my family wants can come and visit me. Whenever I want, I can come go and visit them, because when you get a student visa, if your subject of study is not sensitive, you get a multiple visa. So whenever you want, you go and visit your family. After I finished my education and I was here and we got approved for the green card, then the travel ban happened, and the green card processes were a lot longer. Actually, before that, I was on a work. Like after you study, you can work for a while.
Yeah.
During that time, if you leave the country, you have to get a visa again. So I couldn't at the time leave the country. And afterward, it was a green card process. So it became like the 3 years of me not being able to see my family. I couldn't go for my sister's wedding, or when we decided to get married here, my family couldn't attend. Only my mom came from all our families, like not my husband's family, no one from his side, and from my side, just my mom.
And that was because of the travel ban,
Yeah.
because they were not allowed to come to enter the US, right?
So, no, at the time, the visas were taking a really, really long time. So, my father was waiting for his visa for like a year and a half, so he couldn't come. My mom could come, but my sister was rejected. So, something like this. But then, right after that, so our wedding was November, I think 2016, then 2017, travel ban happened, and they couldn't come at all afterward. And we couldn't go and visit them too. So I think that's really hard to think that your family can never come and see you, because when especially when you get married, you like build, you want to build a family, you want to like have a home and have your family come at least once a year and see like your new life, your career, like your progress. And knowing that they can't do any of that is like, it just makes you think like, do I want to stay here forever? Like, do I want to call this a place a home? Like it's hard. Like, I think it's the simple thing to for a lot of people, but for me, it's a dream that like my parents would knock on the door and I open the door and have them as the guest in my home. Like that's a dream. Like I've never had them like after the travel ban stuff happened.
Let's talk about your company, Init.
Yes. So, Init is a video campaign creation platform that allows people to like gather around a topic and share videos of their stories or experiences, and they can even do it anonymously. So, I started it because I realized a lot of topics are really sensitive. I don't know, like abortion or like gun violence or many topics here. But more specifically, a lot of issues are sensitive in countries that are more oppressive, and people know that if they speak up and share their stories, they're risking their lives and they can end up in a prison. So that's why they are more silent on social media and then they don't share their stories. And the damage that it does have is that silence usually only benefits the oppressors, not the people who are oppressed. And when you don't speak up, your voice is not heard. And that silence and passiveness damage the democracy itself. And the world wouldn't know. Like, for instance, right now, people would actually talk about whatever their concerns is on like messaging apps because they consider them to be safer and more private place or like private Facebook groups, you know? So within it, we want to allow people to start a topic or like a video campaign. We call them missions. And then ask everyone, hey, if you like have dealt with this issue or topic, come and share your story all in one place. So now, instead of having all the stories spread around on all like different accounts and different platforms and social media, they would be all in one place. So what it does is that it just has a lot of power because power of numbers, how many they are. Imagine there are like, I don't know, 3,000 people saying the same thing about the same topic. That's much more powerful than seeing a few stories. And also, like, since we allow them to post anonymously, they are much more empowered. And our anonymous feature even allows them to like pixelate their faces. So one of the first things that we thought about was the travel ban. People wouldn't really share their stories, or even when they did, they couldn't get much attention to them. And the ones that they didn't, because they would think that it would affect their visas. A lot of these people have a husband who is overseas or a wife, a kid. Like they don't want to risk it at all. And when they would share on social media, like nobody would see it because I mean, like there's just one story, and then after a while there's another. It would get lost in the news feed. So what we did, we just asked people to share all these stories all in one place and tell us like how they're affected, and we gathered like 100, I think 10 stories from so many people, even Americans who had a person from one of the 7 countries that are impacted by the travel ban who is not here with them, and they don't know like when this they can be together again, you know. So that a story was covered by the CNN, and also like I think Congresswoman Elhan Omar posted about it, and a lot of like other media platforms covered a lot of the stories that we had. And even when the No Ban Act was going in the Congress, a lot of our stories were used for media attention, like getting media attention and PR, and to reinforce why that matters.
So, what other campaigns are you thinking about launching on your platform? Have you thought about any recent events that have really spoken to you and that you want to feature on your platform?
I would like it to be mostly like sensitive topics because otherwise people can just do it on social media, right? So one of the ones I think would be really impactful is about like abortion, late term abortion. And another one I think would be really powerful would be gun violence, you know, or like police brutality. I think a lot of these people have a lot of stories, but because it's like one here, one then, they can't bring attention. But what if there are so many people, especially communities of color, could be empowered to say like how they're being treated?
And Shiva, if people want to know more about your Init platform, is there a website they can go to?
Yes, it's in-it.com, in it. And we call it in it because you need to hear stories from people who have been in it. So any issue. One other topic that I am thinking about is the like immigration issues. So whether like you've been mistreated by ICE,
That's an
uh,
interesting topic.
yeah,
Yeah.
or the DACA dreamers and how, what are they gonna
Yeah.
do? You know, when they have to go back or
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about American foreign policy and Iran because it's been in the news lately. We see that on TV a lot, and there are tensions between the two countries, and tensions are escalating. Now, Iran has been a central player when it comes to US foreign policy in these last few years. We've seen that, right? With Obama, the focus was on getting the Iran nuclear deal passed. And while one of President Trump's first acts in the office was to repeal the deal. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you imagine the relationship between America and Iran developing in the coming years?
Right now, they both sides are just trying to show who's more powerful.
Hmm.
And I don't know, it's like an endless game. And it's, I think, very dangerous line that Iran is walking on, because it can really end up to like becoming a war. But at the same time, we know that a war in with Iran would cost so much because Iran is such a big country and it's very equipped and has some like big allies in the region, like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. So that becomes like a humongous war. It's not just limited to Iran, and that's why it makes it really risky. But at the same time, I think the fact that U.S. broke the deal, it was a law that had been worked on for like 10 years, and after 10 years, there were 6 countries that came to a conclusion with Iran, and they all made a deal. And Iran just did literally everything that was in the deal, and U.S. just backed out you know? And if Iran had done anything wrong, that would have been acceptable. But the fact that US left the deal and forced all the European countries who were part of it to do the same and not do any banking or like have any kind of relationship, economical relationship with Iran, I think is just not fair because the time that the deal went into effect until it was broken, there were a lot of like European countries that came to Iran because of the currency that made a lot of sense to them, and they started their companies like branches over there, and there was a lot of hope. That's why I was saying like last year that I went, it was just so much hopelessness because it was just a sudden transition. You could see all these foreign companies that came to the country and opened up their branches and they started investing in a lot of like youngsters, and people got these amazing jobs. All of a sudden, they were all gone.
So, as someone who has lived in Iran, an Iranian who has a green card now, you're caught between two countries, right? Because obviously you call US home now, but you are an Iranian as well. What do you hope the US government should do to benefit Iranians in general? And I'm talking about Iranian people.
First and foremost, I think they should go back to the deal. Like I don't understand why they left the deal. Like everything was correct before, like at least it was not ideal, but it was improving. And right now a lot of people like President Trump says like, "Oh, Iran should come to like to terms again and like deal make a new deal with us." But just imagine like as you're like a friend of yours make a promise to you and break it. Do you like trust her again? That's the same thing with Iran. They're like, oh, I mean, President Trump broke the deal once. Why wouldn't he do it again? Why should we make a new deal? Especially since they didn't, like, they did everything that they were obligated to do based on that deal, like Iranian government. So I think that's what I would think is the best way to de-escalate. But otherwise, the less ideal scenario is that they would negotiate again, which is, I think, very degrading for any country to be treated like that. And Iranians have a lot of pride as well, like
Yeah.
how Americans do. Like any country, I think people love their country and they don't want to see their countries like being humiliated like that. And I think making a new deal is kind of humiliating for the government and our people. As for what I want people to know about Iran that kind of they don't know, is one of the ones is that Iran has a lot of different climates and ecosystems.
Mm.
Like it's not just a desert that people think. Uh, like actually, north of Iran is so green. It's next to Caspian Sea, and it has like mountains that are completely green, and they're very close to the sea, to the ocean. No, it's the Caspian Sea is actually the biggest lake in the world, so it's very close to that. It's very humid there and very green. And in the center, we do have a big desert. On the like in the west side of Iran is all like mountains. There is no desert. And also like Tehran is a really, really big city. There are really fancy cars and like big buildings. And there is even a ski resort inside Tehran.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And like north of Tehran, there is a ski resort, like north of the city. So I think there is like a lot of assumption that like people would ask me like, "Have you ever seen snow?" I'm like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one. The other one is that people think like we cover our faces or like women have are forced to do arranged marriage. No, that's not like that. Like people have girlfriends or boyfriends just like any other place. Not everyone, obviously, if you're religious or traditional, you might have an arranged marriage. You might like be super religious and like cover your hair completely. But I mean, both exist like any other country.
And that's true for many countries. It's true for Pakistan as well. People have these preconceived notions about what Pakistan is all about. And I know what you're talking about because people have asked me some crazy questions about Pakistan, right? Same kinds of questions, whether it's about women's rights. And there is diversity of thought in many countries. And you'll see people who are very modern, and then you'll see people who are conservative. And that's true for the US as well. People may have a bit different understanding of it because they live through it here. Similarly, for us, there are all different sorts of people. There is a spectrum. And that's something that is extremely important to understand. So there's this one question, Shiva, that I have been like really dying to ask. And this is again, it has to do with politics. But I've always been fascinated by the last monarch of Iran, Muhammad Shah Raza Pahlavi. In the West, he's revered as this liberator who unshackled women and who privatized industries and who was trying to make Iran modern and Western. And then there is plenty of evidence that suggests that he did things otherwise as well. And he was this dictator. As an Iranian, as a young Iranian, I'm sure you have an opinion about him. Can you talk a little bit about what your thoughts are and what is his legacy?
So I do know and agree that there were a lot of progress in his time and like people had a lot of freedom like on what to wear and like the schools were much more modern. He was trying to modernize the country a lot, but at the same time there was our intelligence force at the time was called Savak,
Slovakia.
and they wouldn't like they would literally close any publication or like newspaper who would say anything criticizing the Shah, or like there was not much freedom of speech. Anyone who would say literally anything would end up in Starbucks prisons and would be tortured. Or there were a lot of books that were banned. So you could say there was not much freedom of thinking as well. So the that's one side of the story. So lack of freedom of speech and critical thinking. Also, like there was another thing that usually is a big criticism of him, that he wasn't competent enough and he was very dependent on the West. And that was something that was one of the big promises of the revolution. We're not gonna be dependent on any like Western country for our or like Easter. So like Eastern country. So they would say like Na Sharqi na Gharbi Jamhuriya Islami, means like not East, not West, only Islamic Republic. So that's what one of the big like revolution things that like people would say. So that like that dependence was one of the biggest themes of unhappiness. They could say like we could be a much richer country if we could use all our resources by ourselves instead of giving them up. So I think that's the two most important things that were not good for that area. But the best thing was that the middle class was very thriving. People were happy. They had a lot of freedom. I think these things are what make people say like America say like make America great again. That great again for like a lot of Iranians is that time because of these kind of freedoms that they had.
But wasn't there more like social inequities and wasn't like the gap between rich and poor getting bigger during his time because there was too much concentration of wealth in few hands. Do you because that's what at least I have seen based on my research, that there wasn't much of economic equality or social equality, so as to speak.
I'm not 100% sure. There was in to some extent, but I think the bigger problem was that the people who were close to Shah were super rich.
Hmm.
So, it's kind of like a corrupted way.
Yeah,
you
because
know?
that's what I've heard, that there was a lot of
Yeah.
corruption
Yeah,
at
yeah.
his
So
time as
anyone who
well.
was close to him would become really rich and like have access to all the resources that normal people wouldn't have.
And there is a school of thought that believes that because the void that he left also led to the revolution of 1979, and for revolutionaries to take that place, take that spot. So
Yeah. So the one of the like other things that people don't usually know, they think that revolution was purely like a religious revolution, but it was not. There were like few different groups. One of them were like a lefty or communist group.
exactly.
They wanted more social equity, as you were saying, like social balance and like justice in that sense. There was also a group of like nationalists who wanted to bring the country, like they were very like patriot and they wanted to bring Iran back to its like original values of, I don't know, like 1,000 years ago and stuff like that. But they were like actually really good and very well educated group, the nationalists. And there was the religious groups. They were believing that the Shah needs to like respect more of the religious heritage that the country has and stuff like that. So these three groups actually like were joining forces and Khomeini led them. So they all thought that what Khomeini had promised was that afterward they would all be respected and all their needs and there would be decision making by all these different parties. But after revolution, then suddenly the war happened. And when the war is like happens, any country becomes in this stage of emergency whenever they wanted to express their thoughts and needs, because the majority that took over were the religious ones. They were saying like we're gonna like get back to these issues later.
Yeah.
And by the time the war ended, because it took like 8 years, they already like took completely over and the other two parties had no say at all.
And Khomeini crushed dissent as well. This was done by Shah, and then even like when Khomeini came to power, he did the same to the leftists. So unfortunately, they were crushed by him as well.
Also, there was another group that I forgot. They were Mujahideen. And Mujahideen, they were actually very religious, but their thoughts and needs were like kind of different with the other ones. And they wanted to have a say, but they couldn't. They left to Iraq. They did some bombings in the country. So it's like a chaotic thing. Like, you just add all those things together. It was just a mess.
Interesting. So moving on.
It's hard to explain all these like things that
Absolutely. I mean, we are just trying to take this crash course in history of Iran,
yeah,
right?
maybe I'm not the best. Like,
Yeah.
I
Right.
tried.
You're trying. You're really trying.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving forward, what is your hope for Iran? A. And now that you call America home too, if you were to describe America in one word, how would you describe it? Or one sentence. I always tell my guests you can describe it in a sentence, in a word.
My hope for Iran is that they would have more hope and independence. And that's the biggest thing. I think right now it's like a lot of our elite has left the country. So there are two times it happened. Once was after Ahmadinejad got reelected, and then these recent years, a lot of people have left, and that leaves the country without all these amazing resources, like brains that it had, especially since our country allows us to get free education. So our schools are pretty good, and we get them for free. Our universities are free mostly. We also have private universities, but the greatest ones are the public ones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I hope that all these amazing talent in the younger generation could save the day and help the country thrive. As for the US, one sentence you
It,
said.
it could be a word, sentence, anything.
I guess extreme. I think a lot of things are in this country very extreme. Even change is extreme.
Yeah, from Obama to Trump, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, things are like extremely good, but can like all of a sudden become extremely bad. Or some cities are extremely progressive and some are extremely conservative. Or like I think there is a lot of extremes in this country, more than any other place.
Thank you, Shiva. This was great. Keep doing what you're doing. And I hope people who want to know more about Shiva's Init or platform, they can visit the website and
Yeah,
they can
once again, it's in-it.com.
and they can contact you. Is there a way to contact you
Yeah,
directly? Yeah.
Shiva at in-it.com, and Shiva is Shiva.
Great. And thank you everyone for taking the time out to listen. Give us feedback. And if you like what you hear, please share. We have GoFundMe, so you can contribute to that. Details are on our website and social media. Until next time, when we come with another inspiring story. And in the meantime, stay connected.